So this time around, what we're going to be doing is using event dispatchers as a way of communicating between blueprints. In this case, we're going to use the drop targets that are aligned along the drop target set to communicate back to the set whenever they've dropped. When they have all dropped, we're now going to pass that information onto the game mode and increase the current game's multiplier. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my drop target and I'm going to add an event dispatcher. So this is going to be a rather simple one. All I'm going to do is I'm going to add an event dispatcher and I'm going to call this onDrop. Now essentially what we're going to be doing is, this doesn't need any inputs set up here, so for the time being this is fine. What we're going to be doing though is we're going to say onDrop, anything that has been bound to this event is then going to call a respective function accordingly. So within my drop target, I'm going to drag this over and I'm going to say call. So now, on a hit, we call drop, and when we drop, we're going to call onDrop. Compile. And now in my drop target set, what I'm going to do is, in my construction script, I'm going to go ahead and add a binding such that when the game actually creates all of the drop targets, so when the construction script is run, what I'm going to do is bind an additional event to this. So to do this, what we need to do is follow along here. We can see that this is the point where we add the drop itself. So afterwards, I'm then going to say, after we set the text, let's do one other thing, which is going to be, as BP drop target, I'm going to bind onDrop. So I'm going to bind an event to onDrop. I'm just going to plug this in here. Now, because we're in the construction script, I actually want to bind this to a function in the event graph, well, an event in the event graph. So I'm going to right click in the event graph and I'm going to create a custom event that is just going to be called process drop targets. So every time a target drops, it's going to run this function. And to do that, what I need to do is go back to my construction script, and in the event, if I drag off of this, you can see that we have a couple of options, but the one that I want here is create event. So I've dragged off of the red pin. At which point I'm going to select process drop targets as the function. This means that when onDrop gets called on this child actor component that we've created, it's then going to call process drop targets on this actor. So whenever we call process drop targets, let's think about what we need to do. Well, we need to step through, we need to keep track of how many drop targets we currently have. We then need to decrement it, so we need to remove one because one has now gone down. And if the current number of targets remaining is equal to 0, we then do something to the game mode. So for us to do that, we're going to need an additional variable, which is just going to be called target counter. So this is the number of targets currently in there. So I'm going to go integer. Now, this is going to be set up such that when process drop targets gets called, we're going to get the current target counter. So I'm going to get, and I'm going to type in minus minus, which means decrement. So subtract 1 from it. Now after I've done that, I'm going to see if this is equal to 0. Because if this is equal to 0, we're going to do a branch, because that means that all of these have dropped down. So we're going to do a branch, at which point we're then going to modify the multiplier back in our game mode. So in our game mode, we currently have a value called multiplier, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to get the game mode, I'm going to cast it to the pinball game mode, I'm going to get the multiplier, and I'm simply going to drag off of that and type ++. So increment float. And then I'm going to connect this up and connect this up. Now, this is currently missing something. At the moment, we're never telling the target counter what it should actually be equal to. So there's a couple of different ways that we could do this, but what I think I should actually do is add one more quick custom event, which is going to be in the game mode, which when we reset, we want to, whenever the game gets reset, we want to make sure that we've bound the values to be the current counter again. So every time the game gets reset, we want to actually set target counter to be back to that. So to do that, what I'm going to do is in my game mode, under reset game, I'm going to add an extra call just at the very end here, which is simply going to call an event dispatcher. So I'm going to create another one, which is called onGameReset. and I'm going to call this here. And in my drop target set, I'm simply going to say on begin play, we want to get the game mode. So I'm just going to copy and paste the game mode reference here. So on begin play, let's get the game mode. And let's very quickly just bind to on game reset, which is what we called it. So we're binding to this here. And the event that we're going to be binding is simply going to be called, it's going to be called reset drop target counter would be fine. So I'm going to create a new custom event. Oops. And it's going to be called reset drop target counter. And this, now I could actually just plug this straight into here if I didn't want to do the custom event, but this can get kind of messy doing it this way. It's okay for the time being though. And all I'm going to do is say target counter is equal to the length. So I've grabbed my target string, the length of the string. So compile. Now we're getting a little error here. Oh, now the reason this is throwing an error is because I compiled this before compiling the game mode. So if I go back to here and hit compile again, it'll be totally fine. The reason being is that it's the game mode that had the delegate in it, the event dispatcher. So we've created that. That's now able to reset there. Now I believe reset game is currently being called whenever we create the game itself. So we should be fine. On begin play, we call create main menu, which on play resets the game. Yep, so this should be fine. So there's one last thing that I want to do here, which is in my drop targets. I'm going to, again, I'm going to set these up such that on begin play, I'm going to bind reset. So the reset function that we've already created, reset target, is going to be set so that when the game resets, we're going to be doing that. So once again, I'm going to drop in my pinball game mode. I just pasted it in from earlier. And I'm just going to bind on game reset. We want to go event dispatcher, create event. And I'm going to say reset target, which is the function that we created earlier. I'm going to compile and save. So now when the game resets, all of my targets should also come back up to the top. So with that done, we should be ready to test this out. So if I were to hit play, okay, so we've had one tile fall down. Now let's quickly test if these reset. 1, 2, 3, and this should be my last life. So now when I hit play again, you can see that that pops straight back up. Fantastic.